So, should personal freedom be unconditional? It's an interesting question because there's many different factors to consider when looking at personal freedom and balancing it against the collective good. Now, libertarians tend to believe that personal freedom is always paramount, that it always trumps the collective good. Their only exception that they will make is when something breaks the NAP, which means the non aggression principle. Now, as I understand it, their definition of the NAP is something that directly harms another person. So, if you act violently against someone, if you steal their property, if you trespass on their land, or if you touch them like without their consent, like in a sexual way or something like that. Those things would all violate the NAP from their perspective. Now, my problem with this is, as I've said many times, is that libertarians don't seem to comprehend the idea of indirect consequences or indirect harm. That there are certain things you can do that are just as bad as many things that they'd consider to violate the NAP, and in many cases worse. Because I would argue, for instance, like slightly trespassing onto someone's land, like let's say if you're walking on the sidewalk and you're trying to get out of someone else's way, so you have to walk slightly onto somebody's front lawn, I would say that's violating their rights much less than some of the other things that I'm going to mention here in this video. So I'm going to give a few examples of things that libertarians would probably defend and would probably say don't violate the NAP and would probably say should be totally legal and unrestricted, and why I disagree with that. And again, these are only a few examples that I could think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there's many, many other issues like this. Probably ones that are more important than some of the ones I'm mentioning here. But again, these are just off the top of my head. So the first is car modifications. Like when people will modify their vehicles in a way that makes them louder. And they do this for no other reason. And it doesn't serve any purpose other than to make the vehicle loud and annoying. It's by no means essential toward the functioning of the vehicle in any way. And this is a common thing among car enthusiasts and car culture. And I'm sure everybody's heard this kind of shit at one point or another. The farty sounds, the like the really loud modified cars. And the worst experience I've ever had with that was when me and my dad were staying in Atlanta before taking a flight home. And we were staying in College Park, which is a very black suburb of Atlanta. It was in kind of like a very commercial area, like full of stroads and just like sprawl, but like fast food chains and stuff. Like that's where the hotel was. And it was like literally all night long hearing modified cars fucking everywhere. It was unbearable and annoying. So yeah, car modifications. An interesting thing is I looked up a thread on Reddit where people were talking about it. And apparently, sure enough, red states are less restrictive with these sorts of car modifications compared to blue states. Apparently, it's California and New York that are more restrictive on it. You know what? Fuck these car modifications. Yes, it should be illegal. It's annoying, like when you can't sleep because somebody is driving with a car that is so loud that you can hear it like a mile away. It is so fucking annoying. It's antisocial. And in my opinion, yeah, it does violate the NAP. It is aggression. It's aggressive behavior. It's stupid douchebaggery, and it serves no functional purpose. It is straight up annoying. And I kind of do feel the same way with Harleys. Like, I'm not anti-motorcycle in general because there's actually benefits to motorcycles. Like, they use less fuel than cars do, and they take up less space. So even though they're more dangerous, there are like more dangerous for the driver. Although they're actually less dangerous to pedestrians, so that's another benefit. So motorcycles are a mixed bag, but nonetheless, I think certain types of motorcycles are just way too fucking loud. So yeah, but I mean, with car modifications, on the other hand, it serves absolutely no purpose. So yeah, fuck your car modifications. That shit should be illegal. like modifying your vehicle just to make it louder for no other purpose other than to be an asshole and to just piss off the entire neighborhood. So, okay, another example is smoking indoors in public places. Now, this is something a lot of libertarians and conservatives have been pushing to bring back. Like, we need to bring back indoor smoking in public places. I say no. Fuck that. Again, that is aggression. You're blowing smoke in other people's faces in a confined indoor space. You're polluting their air. You're making it fucking unbreathable. And it stinks. And the smell just gets everywhere. It gets in your clothes. It gets in your hair. It just gets everywhere. And I remember, I'm old enough to still remember in the 1990s when people were allowed to smoke indoors still in many public places. And it was shitty, and I'm not nostalgic for that particular aspect of that decade. Honestly, and to be fair, okay, there's definitely some hypocrisy in how liberals and leftists are anti-tobacco but pro-weed. Like how they're trying to ban tobacco entirely in New Zealand and the UK while legalizing weed or trying to legalize weed at the same time. It's very hypocritical. But at the same time, credit where credit's due. I don't see liberals or leftists advocating for people smoking weed in indoor public places, except maybe like designated marijuana cafes. And I'm against that too, because why should there be a marijuana cafe but not a tobacco cafe? You know what? No, fuck that shit. It should be illegal in both cases. Take it outside. I mean, I'm not even sure how I feel about marijuana legalization in general, but that I'll get to that a bit later in this video. But my point is, to their credit, they're not advocating for everybody to be able to light up a joint on a subway train or in a restaurant or in a shopping mall. They're basically saying, like, outdoors. And even then, I don't know, are you allowed to smoke weed outdoors anywhere? I don't actually know how the law works on that. You can actually get high off secondhand weed smoke, even outdoors you can sometimes. Like I actually, when I was in Italy, on the island of Capri near Naples, there was a guy puffing a big ass doob and he just blew this massive smoke cloud into the air. And I felt high a little bit for like maybe 10, 15 minutes because of that. I don't know, maybe it's a placebo effect, but I felt it a bit. So yeah, I mean, that would be another example, frankly, is smoking weed even in public places, even outdoors, because yes, people can get high off secondhand smoke non-consensually. So yeah, I mean, in that case, yeah, I would say the restrictions on weed should be even stricter than tobacco. But nonetheless, in both cases, like with tobacco, I think smoking it outdoors isn't as big a problem unless it's like a really crowded place, like a bus stop or a train station that's outdoors. But I mean, like, and even then, if they're like at the end of the platform by themselves, I don't give a shit that much. It's just when they're surrounded by other people in a very crowded area. But yeah, I mean, in general, I would say that's another case where they think, oh, it doesn't violate the NAP. But yeah, it kind of does, because you're puffing the smoke in people's faces and forcing them to breathe it in. It is violating their autonomy because it's non-consensual. Like I didn't consent to have that fucking weed smoke blown in my face or to smells tobacco smoke everywhere and fucking breathe it in when I'm in an indoor confined public space. I don't consent to that shit. So yeah, I mean, it is a violation, frankly. So that's another thing. Fireworks. Now, I've been talking about this a bit lately. In my opinion, fireworks should be restricted only to certain holidays. You should not be allowed to set off fireworks whenever the fuck you want. And it gets annoying sometimes. Like when I hear it for weeks on end before or after Canada Day or before or after Victoria Day, not just on the day itself, but the entire week and then the week after. It is so annoying and I hate it. And yet again, I think it does violate people's autonomy. It violates your ability to sleep, just like the car modifications do. It's annoying and it's not something that's essential in any way. Like there are certain things that will wake people up, but do have an essential purpose. Like say trains. Trains can be pretty loud. Emergency vehicles with their sirens can be pretty loud. But again, these things do serve a vital purpose, whereas fireworks and car modifications don't. But again, I'm willing to grant, yeah, fireworks are part of our cultural heritage and they should be allowed on certain specific holidays because it's part of our culture, it's part of our traditions. I'm totally fine with that, but not outside of these holidays. You should not be able to just set off fireworks whenever the fuck you want in the middle of the night. It's annoying. It is really fucking annoying, and it does make it like impossible to sleep. So that's another thing. Like when I was staying in Naples, there was some near Naples in Pompeii, there was some guy who for some reason would set off fireworks constantly at 11 p.m. each night. It was so annoying. Apparently, like according to the TV show Gomorrah, that's how they announce where the drug deals are going on. Maybe that was the reason. I don't know, but it was so annoying. So yeah, that's another thing. Setting fires during fire season. Now, whenever there's an area that's under extreme fire watch, like for forest fires, and they place any kind of restrictions on starting fires, inevitably the libertarian contingent of the population starts bitching and moaning and complaining, why can't I start a fire whenever the hell I want? This is unjust, government intrusion, blah, blah, blah. There's a reason these restrictions exist. These wildfires can just be extremely deadly. They can spread really quickly. And I mean, yes, too much fire suppression can be a bad thing, but there's a reason why during times of extreme fire danger, fires are suppressed. Because when it's extremely hot and extremely dry, these fires can spread, like literally, as the expression goes, like wildfire. They spread like crazy, and there's a reason for these restrictions. Again, I think it does violate the NAP in my opinion, because it's like you are endangering tons of people and their property and their lives and the natural environment just so you can light a campfire in the middle of July during a heat wave when there's been no rain in 2 weeks. So yeah, I mean, that does violate the NAP. Fuck you. Or it should, in my opinion. Another example, okay. This is obviously a more contentious one, guns. Now, opening this whole can of worms, I think there's good arguments for and against gun ownership, like against liberal gun laws. But I do think that some people take it so far that it's like, okay, you're creating like a Wild West society. Like, for instance, when people say the really like, shall not be infringed hardcore gun rights people will say that you should be allowed to take like a fully automatic rifle in open view on like a crowded subway train in a major city. I'm sorry, that's insane. You can't have that in a civilized society. And again, like I say many times, what works in rural areas and small towns doesn't necessarily work in big cities. Maybe in rural areas, having pretty lenient laws toward guns works. But in big cities, no, you can't have people in crowded areas full of people carrying fucking AK-47s in full view of everyone. You just can't have this shit. Everybody will feel afraid. Even if the person means no harm, it's fucking scary to just be on a crowded subway train and see some guy who's not a police officer, who's not a soldier, who's just some random fucking guy with an AK-47 or an AR-15. That's the right number, right? AR-15? Yeah. Yeah, or any kind of automatic weapon, like, in that kind of circumstance. Like, again, like, I think much of the disconnect in politics is, like, people in urban areas trying to impose policies on rural areas that don't work in rural areas, and vice versa, people in rural areas trying to impose policies on urban areas that don't work in urban areas. And I mean, of course, there's all kinds of in-between places and in-between circumstances. But nonetheless, I'm just saying, like, to some extent, like this idea that, like, there should be absolutely zero restrictions on firearms whatsoever, like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a bit nutty. And again, like there are good arguments that are pro and anti-gun that I've seen. Like for instance, I was leaning more anti-gun for a while because I was looking at homicide rate statistics, and the US is just so much worse than every other developed country. But then I managed to see robbery per capita and theft and burglary, any kind of crime involving stealing, and it's like actually Western Europe on average is worse for those crimes per capita than the US. So maybe there's an argument that like guns increase the homicide rate but decrease the rates of theft related crimes. That is absolutely plausible. And you're way more likely to have your shit stolen than you are to be murdered. So it's like even if being murdered is worse, yeah, having your shit stolen is just way more common. But again, I digress. My point is like with the gun argument in a broader sense, I can see legitimate reasons to why gun ownership in and of itself doesn't violate the NAP or isn't something that's just antisocial behavior. But I think like advocating for the right to just carry an automatic rifle in open view on a subway train or in Times Square or in some like crowded public place in a big city, it's just kind of nuts. And nobody in these cities wants that kind of shit. Like almost nobody would support it there. And it would just make everyone feel uncomfortable and justifiably so. And I mean, there's reasons why that kind of policy just wouldn't work there. Okay, my final example, and it's a big one, is drugs. Now, libertarians tend to vary on the issue of drugs because there's left libertarians and then there's right libertarians. And I find left libertarians are very much pro-drug, whereas right libertarians, which are kind of like right libertarians sort of overlap with conservatives to some extent. Like there's a big gray area between people who would call themselves libertarians or conservatives. Yeah, right libertarians tend to be more anti-drug. But, I mean, I would say that's another classic example because, yeah, by doing drugs, technically you're only hurting yourself. But then there's all the indirect consequences of drug use. There's the fact that people become addicted and then they start committing crimes to feed their addiction. They start stealing shit to feed their addiction. Or as a result of drug use, they become increasingly mentally ill and they start attacking random people or behaving in really antisocial ways and scaring everyone, making everyone feel uncomfortable. There are tons of indirect consequences of drug use. So yeah, technically by injecting the heroin into your arm, you're only hurting yourself. But indirectly, you are probably hurting a lot of other people around you. You're sure as hell hurting your own family and friends and loved ones through the disaster you are putting them through. But you're also indirectly hurting a lot of random people because, yeah, what happens when you start stealing their shit to support your habit? So again, like there are so many reasons why drug use is something that, you know, it doesn't just harm the user. But moreover, it's like, okay, I understand that, you know, different drugs have different harms and there's arguments to be made. Maybe some drugs should be legal, some shouldn't. But I'm definitely in the case of hard drugs like heroin, meth, crack, bath salts, what have you. Like there's good reason why these drugs should be illegal, fentanyl or heavily restricted. Like I think fentanyl is overprescribed in a legal context, and that's another big problem. But yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a reason why these drugs should be illegal. But even with softer drugs, I think I'd say I'm a bit more on the fence about that, like weed. But I mean, I do think there's legitimate reasons why doing drugs, like you're not just necessarily harming yourself. Like there are many ways in which the drug users harm other people. So yeah, those are some of my arguments against the idea of unconditional freedom, unconditional individual liberty, the idea you should be free to do whatever you want as long as you're not directly harming someone else. Like I don't agree with this concept. I don't think it's a good basis for a civilized society. And I do think that in many ways, the places that allow these kinds of things, there's just a lot of negative social consequences. And there's reasons why there are certain negative externalities, like places that are more lenient on drugs have worse crime, or places where you can modify your vehicle with annoying, loud components. Maybe people don't sleep there as well. And I'm sure there's negative economic consequences of nobody being able to sleep properly. So yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of factors going on. Or again, like allowing smoking indoors in public places, there's negative health consequences on the public. So yeah, I mean, I think, and it's not just a left right issue, because sometimes like Europeans, bizarrely, despite being more liberal in many ways, are like more leftist or liberal in the left right definition of the word. They can be in some ways more lenient toward indoor cigarette smoking. But yeah, I mean, overall, I just think these are reasons why there should be limits on individual freedom, and it shouldn't be absolutely unconditional.